Well, Laurie has very kindly asked me if I would chair the discussion panel tonight. My name is Margaret Gold. I've been in the mobile technology industry for about a decade and a half, mostly applying mobile and web tech in interesting areas. At the moment, applying that at the Natural History Museum. So if you're interested in very different kinds of tech careers, then do come and have a chat with me later. But just to get a sense of who is in the room and what hat you're wearing, could I please get everybody who is a junior developer or at the beginning of a development career to put your hand up? That's a good portion of the room. Are there any people here that are really interested in starting a dev career but you haven't yet, or you feel like you haven't yet? And how about feeling pretty experienced, been a dev for a while now? Excellent, that's a good half and half. And how many people here are hiring a dev team or putting a growing team together? So we've got some employment hats in the room. Keep your hands up, keep your hands up. People want to see you. People want to spot who you are. Fantastic. So you've got some other people to come up and talk to you afterwards. So we've got a really lovely mix of people here in the room and also on the panel. And I'm going to start by asking each of you to just quickly introduce yourselves, where you're working, and if you could please also say something about where you would put yourself in that spectrum of junior dev, experienced dev, employing devs, growing a dev team. Would you just get us started, please, Sam?
Sure, I'll give it a go. Hi, my name is Sam Morgan. I'm Head of Education at Makers Academy. As to where I put myself in that continuum, I'm not sure I like the description of the kind of binary opposition and somewhere within that maybe. Yeah. But I've been developing for, I guess, slightly over a decade now.
Thank you. Steve, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So my name is Steve Alexander. For the last 10 months, I've had a job in a quite large company. It's called Ascential PLC. It's FT250 company. What that means is it's reasonably big. There are about 1,400 people in the whole company, I think, something like that. The job title I have is Senior Vice President of Technology. What that actually means is that I'm the most senior person in the company who writes code. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm any good at writing code. There are people who are much better than me at writing code in the company. And since the start of the year, I've been growing a development team. We're now up to about 18 people, and we're still growing it further, and trying to do this in a different way than many large companies do it. So in terms of development, I've been developing software since I was 8, so I've got some experience. The 8 years to sort of 20 years experience was kind of rubbish. But I was trying, right? And yeah, I'm still hiring, so I'm on both of those spectrums.
Awesome. Maria, could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Maria Cates. I have been writing code since 2004, but I've been writing it in ActionScript until 2010. So didn't we all, huh? So after that, I'm self-taught. I have a design degree, and while doing my design degree, I decided to learn how to code because it was cool. So after Flash ActionScript died, I started doing front end, and now I'm a backend developer. I've been a backend developer for 5 years now. In 2010, when I decided to switch from ActionScript to doing front end, I found out that apparently no one is hiring women developers without a computer science degree. So I started. It was really difficult to find a job, and in 2011 I started Rails Girls because of that, just to change the environment, because I already had a good job being a developer, and I wanted to help to get other women who don't have a professional degree from computer science, who are self-taught, to just kind of give them that opportunity to start with companies. So I can proudly say that we've changed London scene a lot over this 5 years, and our events are 250 people now, and we have a lot of students who became developers. It's me, Griff.
Chad, could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Chad. I'm a developer and the CEO of thoughtbot. Started thoughtbot 14 years ago, and up until 5 years ago, thoughtbot was just 19 people in Boston, and since then we've grown to about 100 people across 7 cities, designers and developers across 7 cities. So we've hired a lot of people. Over those same years, about 60% of everyone at thoughtbot has gone through our apprenticeship program, which is a 3-month mentorship program where we take intermediate and junior developers and get them to the point of a more senior developer. So 60% of everyone at thoughtbot now has gone through that apprenticeship program. We've done over 60 apprenticeships, and it's an incredibly successful program in terms of outcomes. So that's a particular perspective I bring on this as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And Sroop, last but not least, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Sroop, and I learnt to code 3 years ago. Before that, I had previously a career in art and design, working as a freelance illustrator and designing stuff mainly for print. So for me, it kind of felt like a natural progression to move into tech, wanting to level up my design skills. So I ended up going to Makers Academy to learn to code, and realized very quickly that it's nothing like anything I've ever done before, and decided to kind of move in that kind of direction. So I ended up getting my first job as a junior developer 6 weeks after graduating, and I joined thoughtbot London, who back then were called New Bamboo. And I was there for a year, and then I moved on to product side, working at a startup, which is where I'm currently at the moment. I've been there for 2 years, and they're called Peg.
Fantastic, thank you. So each of you has touched on a really wide range of ways that how people learn how to code, and a wider range of developer skills, how people are learning these is becoming way more varied. So not just traditional computer science degrees or design degrees, but also apprenticeship programs, training programs, intensive programming courses. Can each of you say a little bit about how you're seeing people adjust how they show their skills as a result of that? So not having a comp sci degree from a well-known university or polytechnic on your CV, what other ways can you show the skills that you've gained through some of these alternative methods? Sam, maybe you can get us kick-started, because in the Makers Academy, I imagine you're talking about exactly those kinds of things.
Yeah, quite a lot of our days are filled with trying to understand how software engineers are assessed at the beginning of their careers. So we've graduated now about 1,200 people into the market, into these jobs, and the style of testing ranges across them. I think what's becoming a little more commonplace is to try and set the assessment in some slightly more vocational setting. So rather than assessing based on a qualification, which may be based on outdated information, possibly decades of outdated information, it's becoming pretty vital that even that initial assessment watches how people practice in an environment that simulates a workplace as much as possible. I think the next kind of crank on that, if you like, is to try and observe not just what people produce under workplace-like conditions, that is a kind of tech test with a set time limit that will be assessed at the end, but to watch a little bit more about the process that people go through when they're trying to tackle problems, break things down, solve things in elegant ways. And to do that requires quite a lot more human contact, essentially, with people during that interview process. So I see this method of assessment moving from a very stock filtered mechanism where someone else does the assessment, a university or something, gives you a qualification, through a path now of where businesses are taking on that responsibility but still doing it mostly in quite a stock way, towards a much more sort of human interaction. I think that recognizes the changing role of developers from a very kind of a very traditional engineering mindset to something that's a lot more product focused.
Fantastic. Maria, how are you talking about that in Rails Girls? How are you having conversations about how you show skills that you've acquired from an informal learning environment, where it's a very intensive process, where you're genuinely getting some serious skills under your belt, but you might not have a piece of paper to show for that?
It actually works out really well at events because we almost give individual tutorials. It's one coach, 2 students. All our students at different levels. We actually had once a girl who was doing masters in computer science, and she felt like she needs to be a student at the event. But usually we have juniors most of like 95% of the event. But it's really great for them because even though they come from no background of coding at all, and this would be their first time opening the computer and actually opening terminal, the logic that they apply to writing what they're taught at the event actually helps them a lot to show what would they be like as a developer. So we're just talking with Chad, and I was bragging about that. We had one case when a student, a developer student at Rails Girls was hired at the event as she was there because she worked with the guy who was coaching, and it turned out he was looking exactly for that. He didn't even know it before. He was asking me to help him find a senior developer, and I sent him quite a few people, and he didn't like it. It was not his thing. But that girl just ticked all the boxes, and she got a job, and it was really great. So yeah, she didn't have any official background before that whatsoever.
Fantastic. Chad, how are you doing that with the people coming through your apprenticeship programs? Do you have some formalized way to recognize what they've achieved at the end of the apprenticeship, which is something that they then take with them as they continue their career, hopefully at first with thoughtbot, but then they might move on after that, giving them something to show for it?
We don't have any. We do assessments at each month mark, but we don't have any formal sort of. You're promoted at the end of it, and we have a 100% track record over the last 2 years for everyone getting promoted to a developer or designer at thoughtbot. But we've never really paid attention to degrees that people had at thoughtbot, and we've always had a very practical interview process based on pairing and based on talking through architecting things together. So what we do is for the apprentices and for people who we believe are already at the normal developer level, we give the same interview process. And that's one of the benefits of a practical interview process is you can sort of level the playing field. It's about what you can do, not what's on your resume. And so we can do the same process so everyone can be evaluated equally. And I think that's really important.
Steve, are you doing something similar in your organization? How are you looking at people coming in and being able to observe their skills beyond black and white pieces of paper?
Right. And so it is kind of a challenge in a larger organization where there are HR processes. There's an HR department and they want to see CVs and they that kind of thing. The way we've addressed this is we save the HR department to last. Probably the best way for me to talk about this is to talk about my experience with Makers Academy. Because we've got a team on this team we've got 12 software developers, and there's some designers and product people. 12 software developers, of them, 4 of them have at some point in their lives been through Makers Academy. 3 of them quite recently. And of those 4, 3 of them are women, and one of them is not. he's a man. The interview process we did with people at Makers Academy was this. We went to a kind of a jobs fair thing to be able to talk about what we do at Makers Academy, and a couple of the juniors came along with me to give hopefully an unfiltered view of what it's like to work here, because we believe that like the culture of what it's like is just super important for what your first programming job's going to be. I would hate for someone to spend lots of their own money in 3 months working really hard and then have a rubbish experience. So it's just super important. After that, lots of interviews, initial interviews where they were actually all with me. I interviewed about 10 people, and the main thing I wanted to know is, what's your story? Like, why did you choose to become a developer? And the reason I wanted to know that is that most of these people were changing career, and I wanted to understand what motivated them towards taking this kind of somewhat challenging, rather curious, different way of doing work. After that, we brought in 6 people to our company offices to do 2 things. One of them was to have about an hour-long interview where we're talking about your experiences working with other people. See, we see software development as being like a team sport. It's really important how you work with other people. And so we were asking about their experiences, but it's not necessarily their experiences in software. Their experiences running a non-profit, their experiences doing some work at a bank for one woman who's the employee. Their experiences, doing anything in particular, and then be able to talk about that in some detail and understand how they see working with other people.
Sroop, you've had this experience really recently. You've come out of a boot camp, you've entered the job market. Can you talk a little bit about your experience walking out into the world saying, I've just done this, I've got all these cool skills that I want to get using right away? How did you tell people about what you wanted to do next and talk about what you had just gained?
Yeah, so it was a really intense 2 months after finishing Makers. it's pretty much back-to-back technical tests and interviews, and after a while you kind of tend to see patterns with the kind of things that people are looking for. The thing that I really liked coming from Makers Academy and talking with various companies that already understood what Makers Academy were doing, is that similar to what Steve touched on, is that they asked a lot about my background, not necessarily about like, oh, can she code? Like, it was already a given that, okay, she can code, she's a junior developer, but what else is that? So they all have an understanding that I've had this other career beforehand, very similar, like other reasons, like other people who go to Makers tend to go for career changes. So it's about like, what are their experiences, what are the skills do they have? So I guess I found it really interesting being able to talk about my previous career and my achievements, and not having to enter a job market feeling like I didn't really have anything to offer. So I found that was like a good big positive.
That's a great introduction to my next question, which is, how do you look at moving away from this tendency to talk about a specific programming language? What's your stack? What's specifically required of this job spec? You're going to need to know React, you're going to need to know Java. But what you actually look for when you're hiring a developer is something much broader than programming skills, or even a wider understanding of what developer skills are. Can each of you talk a little bit about this difference between what people feel like they need to be showing and learning and what they really need to be showing and learning? How about we start with Chad?
Ability to learn is one of the key things that we look for, particularly in apprentices, because in 3 months, you're going to have to learn a lot. And so we try to have a very flexible interview process where we are doing specific technologies, but for someone who's not experienced with that, what we're primarily looking at is how they learn. And so we're not putting them in a locked room with no internet connection and saying, do this. In fact, we love people who quickly look up the answer to how to do something and something that they're not familiar with.
That's a great example. How about you, Steve?
I agree with Chad. This capacity to learn is just super important, because technology is changing all the time. The kinds of things we need is changing all the time, and keeping a team at an organization in pace with what's needed. There are really two ways to do that. One is you continually hire and fire people, and there's all sorts of cost to that, as well as it's not necessarily nice for people. And the other one is you treat people as people who are able to learn if you just give them the time and motivation to do. So we make smallish teams. I guess we make two kinds of hires. We make hires for people who've got experience and expertise in things that are important, and we make hires for people who don't. And we put them together and set things up so one learns from the other. And I think something quite magical happens when you have an organization when learning is a thing that happens all the time. You get more listening, you get more empathy, you get more attention to detail.
That's nice. Ria, what's your experience? You've got a really interesting background of both design and digital, which is kind of a highly complementary combination, I would say, although your path might not have been very typical. But then with Rails Girls, you're seeing people bringing in skill sets from completely other sides and adding coding on top of that. What are you talking about with Rails Girls about other stuff to show that you're able to do that makes you a really solid, well-rounded developer?
I always try to talk to as many people as I can in advance. I get a lot of questions, how did I get into it, and how did I start, and was it difficult, and things like that, obviously. So I try to encourage them by telling my own story, like how I behave at interviews, which were terrifying at first. And people were asking me these technical questions and expecting really technical answers, and I had no idea what it is. So my go-to answer was like, well, they ask me something and I don't know it, and I'll say, I'll Google it. What can I do? So I kind of find that it helps to support their wish to become a developer for students, and to actually show that, well, we've all been there, we've done it before, we've all been to the point where we didn't know what to answer. Also, I still find that there are quite a few companies that do whiteboard interviews, which are freakishly scary. I don't think I'll be able to do one ever, just because I'll freeze. And some companies just feel it's acceptable, like Google always does that. And they do tend to arrange a lot of interviews and to try to diversify their teams. And yet they still do these interviews, which, well, obviously people without any kind of computer science background tend to fail very miserably because, well, they freeze and they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So again, talking about that kind of experience, saying that they're not the only people who will probably not pass that, and it's just a scary experience, and they should probably just try to talk to those interviewers rather than try to figure out how to do this test on the whiteboard. I find it's really helpful for them because they get motivated and inspired by, like, well, actually going to the interviews and not being terrified of that.
Sam, is that part of the training element of the Makers Academy? What kinds of advice are you giving people, or practice sessions are you giving people to prepare for different interview styles, how to present, the difference between knowing and knowing how to find out?
Yeah, I think it's a particularly subtle difference. Makers are with us on site for 3 months. So that's not a huge amount of time to pick up a bunch of stuff. And a lot of what you're doing is building on what's already there and hopefully guiding and channeling what's already there. So I think a lot of advice that I give to people that I train and as general we give as coaches is to try and really demonstrate a passion for something. Ideally something technically oriented, but it doesn't need to be, so long as you can move tech into that. And a kind of the passion that's demonstrated by those details. In instrumental training, it's called a rage to master, a kind of an anger, a burning fire that drives you to really want to know everything that you possibly can about a thing. And if you can demonstrate that to someone, I think that generally speaking is pretty appealing. I think the other thing that we try to build in people is an openness to feedback as part of building a reflective self-awareness. So those two things, a passion and a real ability to engage in continuous reflective practice. In terms of training that learning how to learn thing, that can be broken down into a lot of different skills. There are a lot of ways that you can accelerate your own process of learning that regular style education doesn't really consider important enough to train people directly in. So being able to demonstrate those things in an interview is pretty good.
We've talked a little bit about learning coding skills in the first place and entering the job market, that process. But once you've got a few years' experience under your belt and you're thinking about progressing your career and you'd like to get deeper or a stronger skill set or a more well-rounded, somebody that's really looking at how do I move from junior into senior, start taking on a team, taking charge of a product or a client, what kind of advice or in-house training do you give with wearing your different hats for that progression farther along in the career? Chad, I'm going to start with you again, if I may.
Okay, so one of the things that we do is pairing a lot. So we coach people to incorporate that into the practice, even just in a small way, because that is such an effective tool for knowledge transfer and training. We've also open sourced our entire apprenticeship sort of, not curriculum, but we have manuals for how to be a great mentor and how to have a successful apprenticeship. So we put that on GitHub, and we've, in addition, you can go to apprentice.io, and we've collected a list of companies that are doing apprenticeship style things either on using our manuals or not. But that's something that we try to educate about and get more companies doing structured programs, because I think a lot of companies struggle with hiring junior developers and really not knowing how to support them effectively. And so there's actually some fairly simple, straightforward things you can do to set up a program that is really, really effective for people.
Sounds like as an employer you've really taken a lot of ownership of growing your people and supporting your people. Not everybody in this room is going to have the luxury of an employer that's like that. Is there advice that you would give people that maybe don't get that support internally about how they can pursue it externally?
So I would fall back by default on pairing again. I think that seeking out the opportunities to either at your company find someone, or externally if there's no one at your company, and say, would you sit down and would you pair with me on this? That is an effective strategy, and if I don't think they're going to say no. If they do, you might have bigger problems, but that is an effective tool.
Steve, what would your advice be on both sides of that? Growing your career further,
Sure.
progressing.
So I want to tell a story about one of the junior developers in my team. I'm sure he won't mind. His name's Charlie. And in his first week, he developed a prototype with some other people. He was doing a lot of pairing But on this team he was on, he and some other people developed a prototype for, it doesn't matter what it is, it's a thing that helps people register for an event. And there was a session that had been planned to show this work to a very senior stakeholder, the CEO and Chief Executive and Chief Marketing Officer of this particular business. It's a multi-million business. And I said to him, Charlie, you did the work, you did this piece of work, why didn't you show it? And he told me afterwards he was very, very scared. So I call this situational leadership. He may not be the team leader or something like that, but here's an opportunity for him to stretch himself a bit and to take charge of how he wants to show this. He gets a lot of advice and support in how he's going to do this. He gave the demonstration. And afterwards, he said it was such a rush because he'd done this thing that he wouldn't normally have been offered the opportunity. Now, he was at Makers Academy a couple of years before, and in the intervening jobs, he had never been allowed to talk to anyone of any significance other than his boss. And so this was a whole big change. So I believe that if you offer people these opportunities, don't force them to, but if you offer people these opportunities to get into situations where they can take responsibility for their own work and they can talk to people that they wouldn't normally encounter who might have some level of seniority, then that will help them grow these kind of soft skills, these leadership skills.
You got a lot of nods in the audience from saying that Charlie found that a scary prospect. Maria, is this something you've been pursuing yourself in your own career? Have you been facing these kinds of grab the opportunity moments?
Sure, there are always
Can you tell us a little bit about how you've been looking or been encouraged?
In the very beginning of my contracting path, I was considering myself a very new junior with very basic knowledge. I was hired by a very big company, a very, very big company, and there were 3 more seniors above me, and it was a really, really, really big project. 2 months later, all seniors left, and they didn't hire anyone else, and I was left alone on a really, really, really big and important project, being pretty much a junior. I appreciated the opportunity because, well, the leadership team of managers and whoever was above them, they actually just accepted the fact that I could do it, and they just gave me that shot, which I lost a lot of hair that year. It was very stressful. Like, the scale of the project was insane, and the responsibility that was put on me was absolutely it could not have been bigger. But it gave me a really great chance to just see myself as, this is something I can do, even though I have no idea how to, but just one day at a time, I'll push through the tasks. Luckily, there were quite a lot of managers and analysts to support me with suggestions on sort of the logical side of the application. But it was a great experience.
Yeah, that's great. Sroop, have you had experiences like this too? Have you had your first scary take charge, speak up in front of everybody moment?
Oh my gosh.
And how did it go?
So yeah, I guess so. When I was starting out, I guess the thing that I was looking for was to have a place that had enough resources to be able to to train me up. And while I was working in an amazing environment with lots of senior developers, I found, being thrown into a project and pairing with them was absolutely incredible. But at the same time, you kind of find that with some senior devs kind of lacked coaching skills. So a lot of times there would be occasional moments where you'd be working on a project and you'd be sitting there and you'd be watching someone tapping away at the keyboard doing all this cool stuff on screen, and you kind of wouldn't really understand what's going on. So I think getting the pairing side of things right is really important, and making sure that you're matched with someone who does have those coaching and communication skills. So yeah, mentorship was definitely one thing. I guess another thing kind of similar to the story that Steve mentioned again with one of the junior devs. So at New Bamboo, I think like a lot of the developers are here today, we would have like hack day Fridays, and every Friday we'd present what we'd done, and for me I was absolutely terrified of just the idea of getting up and just demoing what I'd done. So I ended up like pretty much passing most Fridays, thinking like no, not going to do it. And I guess it was quite easy to slip under the radar in that kind of environment. Whereas now it's such a huge contrast. Every week I'm demoing things that I've built, getting critical feedback from the team, and I think that's just made me feel a lot more confident in my code.
Sounds like good advice for senior devs too. Spend some time sharing the skills, showing as much as just sitting and pairing. We're all fellow nerds. It's all cool. So I've asked a lot of questions of the audience, but I bet there's a lot of questions. Of the panel, and I bet there's a lot of questions in the audience. So at this stage, I'm going to turn over and ask if anybody's had some questions popping into their mind while we talk, or maybe you've come to the event with some questions in mind. Yes, get us started.
Yeah. So as a recruiting company, it's obviously amazing when developers come and know how to sell themselves. Like specifically, they know what their skills are, they know what their skills aren't, and they're able to represent that. As a recruiter, like in the process of recruitment, do we have a responsibility to kind of level the playing field for people who don't necessarily know what their strengths are, but have the strengths? And even if we don't have that responsibility, is there anything we can do to bring out people who are good but just don't know it?
That's a good question. The role of the recruiter is to encourage people to really showcase their strengths, show off their strengths, bring them up to equal people that do it naturally and maybe know it more intuitively. Some responses from the panel? The role of recruiters in helping the people that are interviewing with them?
Yeah, I'll answer from my perspective. I think this kind of self-knowledge thing is really hard. It's hard in two directions. There are certain people that I have interviewed for jobs who clearly think they know and are a lot better at what they do than they really are, in my estimation, right? And the opposite, I've got people who I've seen who are intensely humble about what they've accomplished and what they do, and they're not really aware. And one of the sad things about this is it plays out in terms of the salary negotiation, like the amount of money people are asking for. I think I've read that this is often an issue with women in technology, that they're not aware of how much they should be asking for, and perhaps have certain social expectations of negotiation. And so it's good to have someone to be able to represent for that. But I think it's something that there are mechanisms we can introduce into companies that also help here by having more transparent salaries, by having more transparent ideas of why someone was hired at a particular level. And that kind of thing.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi. As someone who still works in education, particularly sort of 17 to 20-year-old at that age, if I perhaps ask each of the panelists to suggest something that they would like to see happen more, or in a kind of an ideal world, they would like to be able to see happen in maybe colleges, maybe reflecting perhaps on their own experience of education in that time, just because.
So what more could we be doing earlier on in people's education to accomplish all the things we're talking about here?
I can say from like my own experience that we should definitely get more women in that, and well, more girls into it from the very beginning. And there are lots of tools now to do that. Like there are lots of games that people produce, but unfortunately some of them are very expensive and not everyone can afford that. And schools don't quite push it enough quite yet. And it would be amazing to see the little girls at like first grade, second grade be more interested in technology rather than Barbie dolls, because Barbie dolls are not going to make the money. It's not going to help them, and they will never know what they're missing. So this was my case as well. I was never introduced to a computer before I was 19 years old, and I was already learning design here in London. And then I discovered a computer. And I blame my parents for it because they never showed me what a computer is. So when I discovered it, I went crazy, and I decided I learned everything there was in 1 year because it was so fascinating. And I know that I had other my schoolmates in my class. There was a girl who actually went to do a computer science degree, and she was doing this pre-university courses while I was doing the fashion design drawing, because her parents just knew what it is. My parents just didn't know. So just to put that idea out there to people who don't know what it is, to get their kids interested, then they can make up their mind whether they want to be designers, developers, or anything else. So cool. But just to make them aware of it more and more and more, and partially what I'm doing as well with Rails Girls, and there's a really cool kids club. I think it's called Code School.
There's Code Club, there's Coder Dojo, there's Fire Tech Camp.
Yeah.
There are brilliant things that all of us here in this room could be giving back by being volunteer teachers and volunteer coaches for kids anywhere from the age of 7 all the way up to entering university to teach coding skills. So we can certainly play a role here. And also the variety of our faces here in this room showing kids the variety of ways that a programmer or a coder looks like. That's our responsibility too. So if you're not a Code Clever Coder Dojo volunteer yet, please find a school near you. Yes, question?
Hello, my name is Jan. I'm working in a company which has a distributed team at the moment, and we are only hiring senior developers because of that. Did you ever hear of a good model where you have junior developers joining the team to some level, which, pairing remote is an issue, but is there a way to actually get juniors on board or not?
So with a remote, a remote off in place, remote working element.
Yeah, so my team's in like 5 different time zones.
Yeah.
It's a very early startup, and we don't have big offices in London yet, and we really have to be.
It's a different context.
Setup,
yeah. Are there some ideas on the panel for?
Can answer that.
Yes, please.
I currently work at a company called Honeycomb, and we are a remote company, and we have 4 or 5 junior developers who are from Makers Academy, and 4 of them are Makers Academy. And I know one of the things that junior developers question before they join is how much support they will get being remote, because the whole team is remote, all the developers. So we meet once a week in the office. We pair a lot. Juniors get a lot of responsibilities. They get the same tasks as everyone else, and if they can't figure out something, there's always help. They can always ask. It is promoted to ask lots of questions. So I think juniors are doing really, really, really well. It's impressive what you can achieve in such a short time. But yeah, the company is full remote, and juniors are enjoying it. They're doing really cool.
What communications channels are you using?
Slack.
Slack.
It's always Slack. There's also Screen Hero, which I'm sure most of you heard, which is very helpful.
Yeah.
So you can actually pair.
Yeah, I understand time zones can be an issue. But pairing people up and saying, you are their mentor for whatever period of time, and then establishing you're going to meet on a weekly basis. You're going to make sure that they get their pull requests reviewed by someone on the team, if not you. You're going to be their advocate, and you're going to make sure that they're successful. Is one way where you can sort of move some of it asynchronously, but make sure that they're still getting the support that they need.
Fantastic. Yes.
Kind of extending this question, how do you think companies can help local kids who just come out of school to, actually do the same thing, like pairing up and instead of work with the industry, and so they get an idea of what people can make, what routes people can take, different technologies, the stack, and all that stuff.
Oh, that's a nice spin on pairing. So a spin on pairing. So pairing with school kids.
Yeah.
Has anybody seen examples of that?
The context is my company invites this program called Apps for Good.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So usually kids come along and demonstrate their apps, and then we just give them feedback before they go off to public and demo them. So I was wondering, is there something more solid that we can do, or we already do, that I'm not aware of, that we can actually get kids to come and work, do happy with it?
Yeah. Does anybody have specific examples of things they're doing?
Yeah. So at Current, we partner with a school called School 21. They're pretty exciting. They're one of the government's flagship free schools, and they're getting quite a lot of international exposure. they work in a variety of very different ways, but one of the things that we can do is support them with their sixth form curriculum around computing. Last year alone, only 69% of computing teacher training placements were filled. So there's an enormous lack of expertise within that area. The salary differential is one reason. There are other cultural ones. So one of the major ways in which we, as people with expertise, you may not feel like somebody with expertise right now, but certainly relative to kids at school, you may be. What we can do is to get into those environments and show that. It might seem like a crazy thing to reach out to your local school, ask them, who's head of computing here? Can I get in touch? Can I come and give a talk? Can I come and review some code? Can I come and show people what I do, who I am, where I work? Can I invite some people to my business? It seems like there's this crazy kind of gap that we're for some reason really unwilling to move across. And yet, as far as I can see, the only way to really make a meaningful difference in these environments is to do that, is to introduce one to the other. So School 21 are always looking for people to go and give talks there. They're based out of Stratford in East London, but your local academy, I can pretty much guarantee, would be thrilled to have anyone from a position of business get in touch and say, hey, I'd like to come and talk with some kids.
In terms of going to the school, there's two networks that do support it. There's the STEM Ambassadors network, where you can register as a STEM ambassador, and schools will express their interest in having somebody talk about any given particular topic. And there's also the Founders in Schools network that's supporting entrepreneurs going and talking to kids and talking about their path, which usually involves acquiring coding skills on the fly, as well as being an entrepreneur, learning business skills on the fly. So those are great two different ways to introduce kids to just how much they can do based on their own imagination and desire to do things. So those, I would recommend looking into those. Once again, that's me asking you to volunteer. That's the giving back. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
So kind of following on your question. So sometimes people ask me, is it for me? Because they want to start, but they don't know how it is.
Yeah.
If this path is for them.
Yeah.
So is there any way of like helping them decide, maybe, apart from like showing what I do, but like, are there any non-technical skills that you can look for, or something for people that they have like zero experience doing technical stuff?
So a way to either taste test the life of a developer,
yes,
or
but also kind of show them maybe the feelings around, or like, I'm not even sure like how to ask this question.
Yeah.
Like I know I have this problem that people come to me, I don't know how to answer that.
That's a good question. You're considering doing it, but when you don't really know, it's sort of a mental barrier. Do I even want to go down this path? Do you have some ideas or some advice about a little taste test to see, is this the way I want to go? Is this worth learning more about?
I would say like having a pet project is really useful, never mind how big it is. I also very often recommend to join one of the open source projects, because then again that comes back to pairing. People are usually very responsive on open source and they're very helpful, and you can work on any kind of ticket in any kind of industry, and they will help you through it usually, or there's like really big communities, so it kind of helps you to get started, and no one will blame you for making mistakes, and you will learn a ton.
I thought you were going to say at 10 Railsgrows.
At 10 Railsgrows.
Yeah.
I'd like to add to what Maria said. I spent a lot of years working for a company that makes a Linux operating system, and so we're very involved in open source. And open source projects, there is the job of writing the code, which is really important, but there's also the job of testing things, of writing documentation, whether it's for developers or for end users of the system, of advocating for this software. There's all sorts of other roles that someone can get involved in with something that, maybe they love what the software does. Maybe it's some art software they love to use, or whatever it is. Maybe it helps them schedule their kids, playtime or whatever. Find the software that does that, use it, and then contribute to it in all sorts of ways. And then from that, there's sort of this sideways way of getting to see, what is the holistic nature of developing product.
I think there's also, even at the pre-project stage, even at a point where you don't have a clue what code is and it just looks like magic that someone throws up on the screen occasionally, Keep doing that. There are a few things that I think are quite good indicators. The first one for me is not just do you want to build something, but are you actively interested in how it's built? Are you actively interested in the nuts and bolts, the getting your hands dirty of implementation? Does that fascinate you? Does that intrigue you? The best analogy that I can give is when I was a kid, I used to be obsessed with these How Stuff Works books, which sort of just take something like a ship or an elevator and they sort of explode it, and they show you all the bits of it, they show you how it moves, they show you how it works on the inside, and I could get lost in those things for days. It would kind of be pretty solipsistic to say that every programmer has to feel that way, but I do see a certain commonality across people who are interested in the mechanisms behind stuff, not just the outcome.
I'll throw in my own advice on top of that. Go to Hack Days. Go to Hack Days. They're brilliant, creative environments to watch what other people do, and you can volunteer yourself on a team offering skills that are non-tech skills. Design a logo or design the front end of the website with crayons on paper. Do add some creativity to it. Do we have any other questions? Any burning questions? Yes.
A question about age. Being an older person, I'm interested in how many people in their 50s and 60s go to Makers Academy and stuff like that, and when they do, when they graduate, do they have more difficulty finding work than younger people?
That's a good question. Is learning how to code a young kid's game, and is there age discrimination when you enter the workforce as a newly minted developer?
So there are a whole bunch of intersectional discriminations in our industry. In some ways our industry is better, and in some ways our industry is worse than comparable others. And ageism is a thing that exists within that industry. That said, we have a pretty wide spectrum of people at Makers Academy. Our youngest student has been 18. Our oldest student I won't name, but they were in the 70s. And people attend for a variety of different reasons. Even on the cohort that I'm training right now, we have a pretty wide age split across it, with people attending for various different reasons and at various different points in their careers. In terms of their outcomes, we haven't seen any specific outcome linked with age in the data that we have. So we haven't seen any direct evidence of that kind of ageism from our hires, but it is out there. Does that answer the question?
Sort of, yeah. So the second part, Peter, Chad and Steve, in terms of people applying, do you experience any kind of age? I mean, more specifically, are you wary of hiring people? That guy I came to who was in his 60s but done the academy and was looking for a new career. How would you feel?
Well, I actually had somebody that I interviewed from Makers Academy. I don't know how old he was. It was a topic that I didn't feel like asking about. It wasn't, to be honest, to me, it wasn't that relevant, except in one way, which is this. It's not so much how old someone is; it's more about their willingness to learn. And there are young people who perhaps are less willing to learn. And there are old people who are more willing to learn and so on. But one thing that I think, and this may be a prejudice on my part, but I think is probably a trend, and it's one I've noticed in myself, is that as I've got older, it's become it's required more conscious effort for me to learn something rather than rest on what I think I know. And if that's true for other people, then that is going to make it so that there's more of a challenge to do that. Now I think the problem comes if we're making assumptions about how someone shows up, guessing what their age is, looking at their CV and kind of adding it up, or maybe asking, and then presuming that someone's not going to learn because they're older. I think that would be a huge mistake. Probably the person I respect the most on my team in terms of being a wise counsel for me is about 10 years older than I am, which is not ancient, right? But there's definitely an element of other things that age can bring, and experience and wisdom is one of those.
I think also being on something like the Makers Academy program is a pretty big life move. It's a pretty big statement that you are heavily invested financially and time-wise in your own development and moving to another level. So whether it's Makers or a comparable program, we have someone who's on my current cohort. She's been an embedded software engineer for 20 years, or longer. And what I find so phenomenal is that this is the very first time that she's being introduced to test-driven development techniques, to working in agile teams, to sort of rapid iteration cycles, and is picking that up as fast as possible. I think that sort of thing is a big statement to any employer, that you are personally invested in your own learning, not just to the tune even of a side project, but to the tune of willing to take on significant risk at a more advanced stage in your career in order to acquire that.
To maybe flip it to the employer side and broaden it a little bit to all sorts of intersectional discrimination kinds of things. Like, you cannot rely on the people coming to you and applying. If you do that, you only propagate. When we look at the application pool of people who apply and just come in on their own, it just propagates the trends we already have in the industry. So it's imperative as an employer that you have to actively seek out people that you think would be additions to your team. So whether that be different ages and every other sort of kind of thing, it's imperative that you recruit and not just allow the application pool to come to you and propagate the trends that exist in our industry.
You're saying that you actively look for diversity when you are hiring persons?
We actively look for people that we want to hire. So we only hire about 1% of the people that we talk to. And so that's another reason why it's essential that we recruit. If we looked at the number of people who just apply to thoughtbot, it's even lower. It's way less than 1% of those people. So it's just to have the kind of team that we want to have. It's people that we meet in the community and that we know. And that includes diversity, but it also just means communication skills and the level of technical knowledge, and having a diverse senior-junior pairing. You have to recruit.
So we'll have lots more time for questions over drinks, but we have a closing question from the organizers, because the organizers have a really nice thing in store for all of you in the audience. And their question to the panel is, what is a book that you would recommend to our audience today that they absolutely should read? And then the winners, that Laurie will talk a little bit about how that works in a moment, will receive one of those books. So I'll give you a little moment to think about what book you would recommend to this audience that they absolutely must read. And Laurie, would you like to explain, while they're thinking, how this is going to work?
So we thought what would be a really nice way to kind of thank you all for coming and taking the time to come and learn about the subject. And we thought it'd be really nice to give a collection of books, because that's a great way for people to continue to learn. So in a minute, we're going to just hand out some feedback forms. If you just put your details on there so that we can choose someone who's won later, we'll do a raffle. And then we'll award someone a prize we'll probably do a collection of the books. So yeah, to the panel, what book would you recommend?
Has anybody had an idea?
We didn't tell the panel we were going to ask this question, so they're kind of like thinking, why didn't anyone tell me this before now?
So I'm going to cheat, but the good news is that 2 of the 3 recommendations that I'm giving are available online free of charge, so this will be a cost-efficient exercise for thought. I'm going to recommend books specifically that I recommend to people who wind up the course in my favourite session of the entire course, which is called Continuing Your Learning After Makers. The 2 posts in particular that I recommend are by Steve Yeager. It's a 2005 post called Practicing Programming, and it talks about essentially drills that you have to do every day. The idea that simply doing your job is not going to be enough to stay ahead in this industry and to develop yourself. And what you need to do is a bunch of really deliberate practice. And he gives an awesome set of different things, both coding and non-coding, that you can be doing to build yourself up. Second one is Peter Norvik's Learn How to Program in 10 Years, which I'm sure is an article here that a bunch of people will have read. Peter is, I think, now head of research at Google. He knows what he's talking about, and he talks about the idea of how to really build essential greatness and what you need to focus on, both skills-wise and knowledge-wise, in order to learn. Pulling these two together, because there's kind of a software craftsmanship theme behind what I'm suggesting here, is the Software Craftsman Apprenticeship Patterns book, which is available online as a free PDF, or you can buy it. And it is essentially the concept of design patterns, which are certain patterns to solve certain known problems in programming, but applied to the idea of apprenticing as a software developer. And in software craftsmanship, you are an apprentice until a certain point as you kind of settle down into a rotation among a few different places as a journeyman. So those are the three works that I'd recommend. Only one of them you have to pick up outside of him.
I should have went first. You stole my book.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
Which one would you have said?
Apprenticeship.
Yeah. I'm glad it's getting a good chance.
I got another one.
I'm sorry.
Okay, what's your other one, Chad?
Oh, so my second fallback, I thought this was a question to recommend my book, or else not top patterns, but no.
You could do that. It's one more sale.
If you haven't read the thoughtbot playbook, I recommend it. It's everything we believe about how products should be built and how teams should work and how companies should work. But from a more technical perspective, a little bit, I recommend, if you haven't read it already, Clean Code. That is one of the most clear books for how to craft code, and it is in Java. So language doesn't really matter. The concepts translate really well to different technical stacks. But if you read through that book and take that knowledge into the code that you're writing and to interview scenarios, you cannot go wrong. So I recommend that.
Right. Any others? Sroop, Machine, of maybe a favorite from recent memory?
So can I recommend a book that I haven't read?
Okay.
So it's actually a recommendation from a friend. So for me, having left Makers Academy and having been working in industry for 3 years now, one of the biggest things that I've felt that I've lacked are centered around computer science concepts. So my friend of mine recommended me this book called The Imposter's Handbook. I was looking for something that would give me a pretty decent kind of intro to CS kind of overview that doesn't go into too much detail, but just enough to feel like I kind of understand. So I guess I would recommend this book. It's an ebook. It comes with a bunch of GitHub repos that you can code along to and videos. So my colleague and I are planning to work through that.
Great. Steve or Maria?
Yeah. So that there is, if you go back into the history of computer science, quite a long way, you get to this era where people made computers with punch cards. You had to kind of punch holes in cards and feed them into a computer the size of this room. And one of the pioneers of one of the early software developers around that time was a guy called Gerald Weinberg, also known as Jerry Weinberg. And he became notable because he realized pretty early in his career that what he called the human side of software engineering was really, really important. I think his most accessible and one of his best books is called The Secrets of Consulting. Now, I know that some of you probably are consultants, some of you perhaps intend to be, but many of you probably don't. It doesn't matter. He has a very broad definition of what consulting is. It's basically any time that you feel that you want to give advice to someone else about something that you might know about. And this happens all the time in our careers as software developers, because somebody, whether it's somebody who's perhaps a more experienced software developer but doesn't see the things the same way you do, or somebody in the business that you're serving through your software development or whatever, you want to tell them about something. You want to change their opinion about something. So it's all about that. But it's written in a very unique and some would say humorous style. It's one of the books that changed my whole approach to how I work with organizations.
Well, since everyone else recommended technical books, I'm going to go with the non-technical. It is written by Malcolm Gladwell. It's called The Outliers. I've actually included it in my master's thesis because I believe in what he wrote very, very strongly. One of the examples from the book is how a person who is born on 31st of December is missing the training that the person who is born on 1st of January gets. Just because in the year at school they would be in the same class because it's the same year that they were born, but it makes such a massive difference when you're 6 and 7 years old. And he's given an example how in Canadian hockey that would be the case. They would get people into the same team of hockey players, person who would be born on 1st of January or of any year and the 31st of December of the same year, a whole year difference gap. So obviously the person who's born on 1st of January is by default stronger, bigger and everything because he's a year ahead of the person who's born a year after. And that person, as a successful player, he gets more attention, he gets more practice, he gets more teachers, he's better at what he does because there was more belief put in him because he was just stronger because he was born earlier and so much earlier. So, and there are a lot of examples like this in the book. This is what the whole book is about. It just gives an examples how, well, you were in the right place at the right time and you were believed in. So it's useful for people who are hiring developers and who are actually looking for a developer job or any other job, just to believe in yourself and keep pushing yourself or keep pushing the juniors that you have to put more effort into them, to put more training into them, because they will achieve what you're looking for if they love their job, which they will most likely if you believe in them.
Those are great recommendations. How would you like to do the next step?
So the first thing I'd like to do is invite everyone to have a round of applause for our panelists. I think they've been fantastic.